There are moments in sports that stop you cold. Not because of a buzzer beater, not because of a championship celebration, but because of what you don't see. What you see instead is a superstar, the most talked about player in women's basketball, slowly turning her back on her own head coach, walking to the far end of the bench and refusing to even exist in the same emotional space as the person who's supposed to be leading her. That moment happened, on camera, in front of everyone. And if you think it was just a frustrated player having a bad night, you haven't been paying close enough attention to what's been quietly building inside the Indiana Fever organization for weeks. Because this isn't about one loss, it isn't about one game, one play call, or one sideline argument. What happened in Dallas was the moment a pressure cooker finally blew its lid, and what spilled out revealed something deeply wrong at the core of a franchise that was supposed to be on the rise. By the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why Caitlin Clark may have already mentally left Indiana, and why Sophie Cunningham might not be far behind. But first, let's go back to where it all cracked open. The Indiana Fever traveled to Dallas to face the Wings, a team that, by any reasonable measure, they should have beaten. The Wings had dropped 8 of their last 11 games. They were struggling, inconsistent, and playing without the kind of momentum that wins tight games. On paper, this was exactly the type of opponent a playoff-hungry Fever squad needed to handle, cleanly, confidently, and without drama. What happened instead was a 91-85 loss that felt like watching a building collapsing in slow motion. From the opening possession, something felt off. The energy wasn't right, the ball movement wasn't right. And for anyone who'd been watching Indiana closely all season, the warning signs were already there before the first quarter was even 5 minutes old. This wasn't a team playing loose and aggressive. This was a team already tangled up in something that had nothing to do with the Dallas Wings. The defeat stung, but the way it happened, the decisions made, the patterns that emerged, the body language that deteriorated with every passing minute, that's where the real story lives. Because what unfolded over those 40 minutes wasn't just bad basketball. It was a public unraveling of a locker room that sources suggest has been quietly fracturing for some time. And it started with a single play call. Tip-off, first possession of the game. The Indiana Fever have the ball, the crowd is watching, and Caitlin Clark, the player who has been climbing the league's MVP ladder with each passing week, the player whose national profile has exploded into something the WNBA hasn't seen in a generation, runs the play exactly as drawn up. She delivers a textbook bounce pass to Kelsey Mitchell. Mitchell turns the corner, draws contact, and goes to the free throw line. Clean execution, no problem there, right? Except that play wasn't a one-off. It wasn't a designed mismatch exploit or a situational read. That play, isolate Mitchell, reduce Clark to a facilitator, repeat, became the entire offensive identity for the night. The first possession set a template that the coaching staff never deviated from, and what followed was one of the most puzzling tactical decisions you'll see from a professional coaching staff all season. Here's the number that should make every Fever fan stop and think. Indiana did not run a single pick and roll or ball screen designed for Caitlin Clark until the final 15 seconds of the second quarter. 15 seconds of the second quarter. Think about what that means. The most explosive guard in the modern game, a player whose entire offensive identity is built around reading screens, attacking downhill, and creating chaos off the dribble, was essentially decorative for an entire half of basketball. She wasn't being used as a weapon, she was being used as a decoy, and everyone on that court knew it. Analysts watching the game in real time started flagging the pattern almost immediately. This wasn't subtle. This wasn't a coach making aggressive adjustments and occasionally going away from a star. This was a systematic, sustained removal of Caitlin Clark from the offensive engine on a night when she was riding some of the best individual momentum of her young career. The timing wasn't accidental, and that's what made it so alarming. But what happened as the first half wore on was even more revealing than the play calls themselves. There's a specific moment in the second quarter. You can find it in the film, you can see it in real time if you know what to watch for, where something changes in Caitlin Clark's body language. It's not dramatic, it's not a gesture or an outburst, it's actually the absence of something. She stops looking for the screen. Any basketball player who has ever been in a system knows what that means. When a player stops anticipating the play, stops expecting the ball, stops cutting hard off screens, stops demanding the ball in positions she's earned, it's because she already knows it isn't coming. That's not frustration, that's not immaturity, that's a player who has done the math in real time and reached a conclusion she didn't want to reach. The conclusion was this: the offense wasn't for her tonight, and no amount of effort on her part was going to change that. From that point forward, the Clark who had been making opposing defenses look foolish all season, the Clark who attacks, who creates, who elevates everyone around her, retreated into a kind of cold, deliberate disengagement. She kept her professionalism, she stayed on the court, but the electric urgency that makes her must-watch television was gone, replaced by the quiet resignation of someone who has realized that fighting the system is pointless when the system isn't designed for you to win. The box score told the story with brutal clarity. Caitlin Clark finished with 10 points on 4 of 15 shooting, 2 of 8 from beyond the arc, 9 assists, 4 rebounds, and perhaps most telling of all, 1 free throw attempt for the entire game. 1. For a player whose aggression at the basket has been a signature of her game, 1 free throw attempt isn't a reflection of a bad shooting night. It's a reflection of a player who stopped attacking because she already knew the ball wasn't coming back. When the fourth quarter arrived, it was already over in every way that mattered. Here's what gets lost when the conversation focuses entirely on Clark. She wasn't the only one drowning out there. Sophie Cunningham, one of the most reliable and physically aggressive players on Indiana's roster, finished the night 0 for 4 from 3. 0 for 4. And if you watched her shot attempts in context, you'd understand why. By the time Cunningham got a genuine, rhythmic look at the basket, the game was already slipping away. She wasn't cold, she wasn't off, she was a shooter who never got warm because the ball never found her in situations where she could actually function. That's what happens when an entire offensive system collapses into a single lane. Everyone outside that lane becomes a statue. Cunningham is a player who needs to be moving, cutting, and firing in rhythm. Instead, she was catching the ball in dying possessions with the shot clock bleeding out and defenders already recovered. Under those circumstances, nobody shoots well. It had nothing to do with her ability and everything to do with the structure she was trapped inside. Then there's Aaliyah Boston, and this is where the frustration from within the organization reportedly runs the deepest. Boston carries a significant contract that comes with significant expectations. The expectation, at minimum, is that she functions as a reliable two-way anchor, setting physical screens, converting high-percentage looks at the rim, and protecting the paint against physical forwards. Against Dallas, she did none of those things consistently. Screens that should have created separation for Clark were soft, late, or abandoned entirely. Post touches that should have resulted in easy baskets became turnovers or missed opportunities. And perhaps most damaging of all, there were multiple documented instances where Boston received a handoff from Clark, began moving in Clark's direction on the perimeter, then abruptly redirected the ball straight to Mitchell, consistently, repeatedly, in a pattern that observers noticed and that Clark herself clearly registered. Meanwhile, on the other end, Jessica Shepard had arguably one of the best games of her career, finishing with 26 points and 8 rebounds, while physically overwhelming an Indiana front court that offered almost no resistance. Boston, the player paid to prevent exactly that kind of performance, was neutralized, dominated, and the effect rippled through Indiana's entire defensive structure.
Ogochi Agu of Iraq, not a name that should be putting up 32 against a playoff-caliber defense, finished with a career-night performance, exploiting the disjointed rotations of a Fever team that was falling apart from the inside out. The Wings, losers of 8 of their last 11, played with complete cohesion and purpose. Indiana played like 5 individuals who had stopped believing in the same plan. Kelsey Mitchell, for what it's worth, was extraordinary. 37 points, 9 of 18 from the field, a perfect 15 for 15 from the free throw line. Individually, that's a performance that belongs in highlight reels, but in the context of everything happening around her, it served as the most visible symbol of the larger problem, an offense so completely funneled through one player that everyone else on the floor became irrelevant, a 37-point game that somehow felt like evidence of dysfunction rather than triumph. And then came the moment that no one in Indiana wanted the world to see. Late in the second half, with the game slipping away and the frustration on both sides of the fever bench reaching a visible boiling point, Stephanie White approached Caitlin Clark during a stoppage in play. This wasn't the first time White had delivered sideline instructions to her star guard during the game. By this point, cameras had already captured several exchanges where White could be seen talking directly at Clark, not with her, at her during critical dead ball situations, without any corresponding schematic adjustment to actually help her. But this time was different. Clark raised her hands, and then, in full view of the national broadcast, her teammates, and thousands of people watching live, she turned her back on her head coach and walked deliberately to the far end of the bench. She didn't storm off, she didn't yell, she simply left the conversation, physically removed herself from White's presence, and in doing so communicated something that months of carefully worded post-game press conferences had managed to conceal. The sideline fell silent. Teammates watched. Cameras caught everything. For months, Clark had been the model of diplomatic professionalism in front of microphones. Asked about rotations, she praised the system. Asked about play calls, she credited her teammates. Asked about the coaching staff, she gave answers that were measured, respectful, and completely bulletproof. Whatever she felt internally, she had been protecting the organization's public image with almost superhuman restraint. That restraint ended in Dallas. When a player of Clark's stature and profile publicly refuses to engage with her head coach, not in a heated argument, but in a quiet, deliberate act of disconnection, it signals something that cannot be walked back with a press conference. The mutual animosity had reached a temperature that cameras could no longer ignore, and the carefully constructed narrative of a united fever locker room was gone, just like that. Social media didn't need to wait for the post-game breakdown. Clips of that moment spread within minutes, frame-by-frame analyses, slow-motion replays of White's expression, shot charts mapping every ignored possession. Within hours, the basketball internet had assembled a case that was difficult to argue against. The consensus from fans, analysts, and former players was nearly unanimous. Something is seriously broken in Indiana, and it starts at the top. Stephanie White was brought to Indiana with a specific mandate. The Fever had landed the most transformative player to enter the WNBA in years, a once-in-a-generation talent whose floor vision, scoring range, and competitive wiring gave the organization a genuine chance to build something special. White's job, above everything else, was to build a system around that talent, to maximize it, to protect it. What has happened instead, according to what played out publicly against Dallas, is the opposite. An offense that consistently sidelines its most dynamic player, play calls that reduce a generational passer to a spectator, sideline interactions that have deteriorated from instruction to friction to open disdain. These aren't the marks of a coaching staff that is struggling to unlock a player's potential. These are the marks of a coaching relationship that has fundamentally broken down. The front office is now reportedly in a difficult position. The decisions they made in building this roster, the contracts, the personnel, the coaching hire, are all under scrutiny simultaneously. Boston's deal, which commands the kind of salary that demands elite two-way production, now looks like a significant liability given her inability to deliver the physical and schematic support that Clark's game requires. The backcourt dynamic between Clark and Mitchell, two players with genuinely different offensive needs and philosophies, have reportedly created a structural tension that a coaching staff with a clear hierarchy could manage. But this coaching staff, reports suggest, has chosen a side, and it isn't Clark's.
What makes this genuinely dangerous for the organization is the timeline. Clark is young, Clark is ascending, Clark has options, and while she has given Indiana every public indication of her commitment and professionalism, a player of her caliber does not absorb this kind of environment indefinitely. The WNBA's landscape has changed. Stars have leverage now in ways they didn't a decade ago, and franchises that fail to protect their cornerstones pay long-term prices that are nearly impossible to recover from. The front office knows this. Whether they're willing to act on it before the damage becomes permanent is the real question. It would be easy to frame this entire situation as a Clark story, and in many ways it is, but Cunningham's situation deserves its own examination, because what happened to her against Dallas isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern that reports suggest has been building across multiple games, and her frustration reportedly mirrors Clark's in ways that the public has only begun to notice. Cunningham is a specific kind of player. She's physical, direct, and most dangerous when she's operating in a rhythm within a flowing offense. She thrives on movement, on cutting actions, on catch-and-shoot opportunities generated by a system that creates genuine defensive pressure on multiple players simultaneously. When that system functions, she is one of the most valuable role players in the league. When it doesn't function, when the offense collapses into isolation basketball for a single player while everyone else watches, Cunningham becomes invisible. Not because her ability disappears, but because the system stops generating the situations in which she excels. Against Dallas, she was invisible, and 0 for 4 from 3. In a game where Indiana desperately needed secondary scoring, tells you everything about how poorly the overall offensive structure served her. Reports have circulated suggesting that Cunningham's dissatisfaction with the offensive framework has been an open secret within the organization. Whether those reports are accurate is difficult to verify from the outside, but what is verifiable is the film. What is verifiable is the shot chart. What is verifiable is that a player of Cunningham's caliber in a functioning offensive system should never be finishing a game at 0 for 4 on clean looks. If the Fever lose Clark, they lose the foundation. But if they lose Cunningham alongside her, a player who provides the physical toughness and veteran presence that a young roster desperately needs, the fallout extends far beyond one departure. It becomes a signal to every player in the league about what kind of organization Indiana is, and that signal, once sent, is very hard to take back. Here's where things get genuinely uncomfortable for Indiana's front office. The luxury of time has expired. That's not a dramatic overstatement, it's the practical reality of where this organization sits right now. Every game that passes without a structural correction is another data point in a narrative that is already damaging the franchise's reputation. Every sideline moment that gets captured, every shot chart that goes viral, every social media breakdown that reaches millions of viewers is another brick in a wall that the Fever are building around themselves.
The decision the front office faces isn't abstract. It's concrete, it's urgent, and it essentially comes down to one question. Are you willing to make the changes necessary to build this organization around Caitlin Clark, or aren't you? If the answer is yes, the path forward requires difficult moves. It requires honest evaluation of whether the current coaching staff is capable of evolving its approach. It requires accountability for the contract players who are not delivering the production their salaries demand. It requires a structural commitment to an offensive identity that puts Clark at the center, not as a facilitator for someone else's scoring, but as the primary engine of everything Indiana does. If the answer is no, or if the front office lacks the will to act decisively, then Indiana risks something far worse than a bad season. They risk being the organization that had Caitlin Clark and let her walk. And in a league that is experiencing a cultural and commercial renaissance built significantly on Clark's presence, that failure would be historic, not just for Indiana, for the entire WNBA. The window isn't closing, it's already half shut. Caitlin Clark's face in the final minutes of that Dallas game, exhausted, isolated, carrying a weight that no 22-year-old should have to carry in silence, said more than any press conference ever could. She is a competitor down to her bones. She doesn't quit. She doesn't make excuses. She shows up and she performs, even when the system around her is working against her.
But even the most resilient players have limits, and what happened in Dallas suggests that Caitlin Clark, for the first time in her professional career, may be approaching hers. The Indiana Fever built their entire future around one player. The question that every honest person connected to this organization needs to answer right now is a simple one. Are they actually building for her? Because based on what played out in Dallas, based on the play calls, the box score, the body language, and that one quiet walk to the end of the bench, the answer, right now, doesn't look like yes. And if it stays that way, the consequences won't just shape this season, they'll define this franchise for a decade. If you think the Fever's front office is going to make the right call before it's too late, drop it in the comments. And if you think Clark has already made up her mind about her future in Indiana, let's hear that too. This story is far from over.